Hey Cookie Monsters! Hey rest of pre-K! I am so excited to do this read aloud with you today. We're gonna do a read aloud about Curious George, and he needs to plant some stuff, but he doesn't know what can be planted and what can't be planted. So let's read this story together and find out. This is the front cover. This is the spine. The spine holds all of the pages together, just like the spine in your back. It holds all of the bones together. This is called the back cover. Remember, the author writes the words and the illustrator draws the pictures. Curious George Plants a Seed. Adaptation by Erica Zappi, based on the TV series Teleplay written by Sandra Willard. Jumpy Squirrel was very busy. George was curious. What was Jumpy doing? Bill, the boy next door, told George, Jumpy buries acorns and nuts. He stores them in the ground. He can dig them up later when he is hungry. That gave George a great idea. George buried the orange juice. He buried the butter. He buried the bread. He was glad to find a good place to store food. The squirrel put food in the ground so that he could save it for later. George also stored some food in the ground. Why do you think George stored food in the ground? I think George stored food in the ground so that he could eat the food later, like the squirrel, if he was hungry. Don't you think that's kind of a silly idea? For George to put real food in the ground? I wonder if the food belongs there. When the man with the yellow hat came home, the kitchen was empty. Where was all of their food? George proudly showed his friend. Look at the kind of face George has. He looks like he's smiling. Proud means when you're really happy about something. George, orange juice and bread are not for burying, the man in the yellow hat said. They cannot be stored in the ground. His friend showed George a peanut with a sprout. George was puzzled. A sprout is a small plant growing out of a seedling. Puzzled means when you're confused about something. Take a look at George's face. He looks really confused, doesn't he? This peanut grew into a plant, the man said. Seeds and nuts grow out of the ground if they are not eaten first. George thought he understood. If a little peanut could become a big plant, what would a rubber band become? Look at George. He has a tiny rubber band in his hand. I think George thinks that if he plants this rubber band, it's going to turn into a giant swim tube. Doesn't that sound kind of silly? Rubber bands are not alive. They cannot grow if they are planted into something else. What would a feather become? George is wondering silly again. He has a feather in his hand, and he's wondering if he plants it, if it'll become this giant peacock. Can we plant a bird feather and then watch a giant peacock grow out of the ground? I don't think that sounds right. Maybe George didn't understand the man in the yellow hat as good as he thought he did. He might be confused. George dug lots of holes. He buried lots of things. Soon the house was empty. The man in the yellow hat was surprised. George, umbrellas and chairs are not for burying, the man with the yellow hat explained. They are made by people. They are not going to grow. Seeds and nuts will grow. A few days later, George saw something new in the ground. It was a sprout! Look, George, said his friend. A seed you buried is growing. I wonder what it will be. Soon there was a beautiful sunflower in the yard. George had a green thumb after all. The end. Thank you for the story. Thank you for the story. Thank you for the story. Woo-hoo! Bye.